All right, we've got our next.
Oh, I was going to say one thing about
Oh.
Big Vic.
Go ahead.
That brings up a debate I always have in my head, and might tick some listeners off out there, but it's pretty standard that in some way you're going to get screwed by the big bad music industry if you're shooting for those kind of heights, right? So you might want to weigh getting screwed a little bit for the benefits of your moment in the limelight, for the trade-off that, on your second record you could negotiate something a little better or take credit where credit is due.
Yeah, and well, I agree with that. 100%.
As long as the contract doesn't include your next 6 records.
There's always going to be a trade-off. I mean, no one's going to sign you to their label or to a publishing deal or whatever so they can give you all the money and all the credit. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So obviously any record company has a financial interest. The second they think they can't make money off of you, you'll be gone. You got to weigh that's where I always say you got to figure out what your real goal is. If your goal is to become famous, you're going to have a record company because you're going to need that engine behind you to propel you to be famous. If you want your face in magazines, you're going to need that machine, and that machine comes with a price. If your goal is to make money making music, then you really have to set your priorities straight with that goal, and that may mean not doing deals like that. And
Big Vic seemed like he took a lot of pride in his production, so that could be one thing. He just was firm. I'm not going to give up credit in that one area. So maybe that's his thing.
Yeah, and if he's trying to make himself known as a producer to produce other people's music, that would be silly to have your album released and not having any producer credit on it. So I can understand, and hopefully he's better off for it. All right, our second grouping of calls here.
Hey, this is Chris RBC, and this is my story about how I goofed in the music business and learned a lesson from it. I had a gig at a brand new coffee shop that was being opened up, and they had hired me to promote my record and to play the grand opening of the show. The mayor of the town was going to be there, and many other dignitaries from the town. So we booked the gig, and they told us that they had a $9,000 sound system, so it sounded pretty fancy and brand new since it was a new facility. So we show up. We're about 50 miles, or actually about 120 miles from home, and we show up and we start unloading our equipment that we brought. We brought music stands, we brought our guitars, our amplifiers, and the owner of the coffee shop tells us, well, why are you bringing all this gear in? We have a $9,000 system. So I said, all right, let me go in and check it out. So we walked in, we looked around, and all we saw were 2 microphone jacks in the wall. And I said, okay, do you have a mixer for those jacks? Do they go somewhere? Brought me around to the back, showed me this really fancy system. It wasn't a conventional mixer, but it looked like it would work fine. So then I said, okay, do you have plugs and mics for these jacks? The owner replied, I have 1 mic. I said, well, I have 2 singers, and, could you at least get me another mic? Well, I thought that this would be sufficient for you. I said, well, we need at least another mic, but do you have stands to put the mics on? No, we didn't know we needed that. So with that, we had someone bring another mic down to the gig, someone that the owner knew, and we were still experiencing the dilemma of what we were going to put the mics on. So someone suggested that we have somebody hold it. So that's what we chose to do. So we started playing our first song, and as I was singing and playing the guitar, I kept kind of moving closer to the mic because the gentleman that was holding the microphone kept moving away. So I kept trying to signal him to come closer to me, and once he realized what I was trying to do, he moved the mic so fast that it hit me in the tooth and chipped my tooth. My brother, who was at the gig, saw that this was not working and went into the janitor's closet and was able to get 2 brooms that he taped onto our music stands with duct tape, and then taped the microphones onto the broom stands, and we were able to sing and function that way. So whenever you have a gig, always remember, if it's on a small scale like this was, to always ask if they have a mic, a microphone cable, and a mic stand that you can use without having to chip your tooth.
This is Paul J. Johnson. I used to be in this alternative rock band called Autophobia. These guys kind of got in contact with us who said they had this compilation album coming out. And we checked out the organization, talked to some artists that were working with it beforehand, and it seemed like it was, it had some sketchy stuff here and there, but for the most part, it was a pretty good organization. So we said, yeah, you can use our song, because they seemed like they were pretty pumped about it. But the clincher was, it cost $500 to get us on the compilation, and they said that that's to help cover their manufacturing fees, which, it's understandable. I know a lot of people do that and stuff. The bad part was, we kind of got sucked in, because the president, he was like, oh yeah, I know this guy over at Virgin Records, and I love your album, and I'll show it to you. So, at the time, we were just, a bunch of, juniors and sophomores and stuff in high school. So we kind of, got as giddy as little schoolgirls and left each other voicemails, during school hours and stuff. So it was exciting, but it was just kind of, something to draw us in. So, but we bit, and we went and we paid our $500 to get our song on this compilation album. We waited for a really, really long time. Months went by, and we eventually contacted them. We're like, well, when are we going to get these CDs so we can sell them and try to make our money back? And they're like, oh, well, we had your wrong number, or not wrong number, but we had your wrong address. We'll just get your right address in our system, and they'll send them out. And after a few more phone calls, we kind of just realized that we weren't getting those CDs, and we weren't going to see our $500 either. And the thing that was bad about that was, in our little kind of contract that we made with them, it passed off that $500 as not a purchase but as a donation. So legally that money, was theirs, because it was a donation to their cause. That's kind of our little story of losing money to some people who maybe weren't necessarily evil people, just, they weren't necessarily paying attention to what they were doing. Before I go, I'll just shamelessly plug my solo record, Sleepless, which is now available under the name Paul J. Johnson. But I hope you enjoyed my my story of struggles in the music business, and the best to all of you out there.
Hi, this is Grant Norwood. You can hear me on The Big One by Grant Norwood on CD Baby. Before I did this album, I was hired by an executive producer to produce 100 inspirational songs that would be played in most funeral homes across the United States. We did sessions, and on the last session, the executive producer came up front and said she had to go back to the bathroom, and when she took the master and took off, and did not pay me or our people a single cent for the whole 100 songs. And so if you go to a funeral home, or if you have to be laid to rest, you can hear my work in your favorite funeral home of Grant Norwood and the inspirational songs that I produced free. And otherwise, you can hear my rock music. It's Grant Norwood, The Big One, CD Baby. Thank you again.
Ouch. I was trying to think of some comparison in my head between the dead people and that woman, but
that's right.
Oh my! It wasn't coming to me, but
that's brutal.
Yeah,
getting all those tracks ripped off. Again, I'm guessing there probably wasn't a contract in place. There was probably just a handshake deal, and I don't know. He didn't leave those details, but these days, a simple contract, even if you just write it down, handwritten, it's just something that both parties can sign and say they're agreeing to something, because otherwise, if something like that happens, and I don't advocate suing people for no reason, but if that cost him time and money to produce, I mean, it's really hard to get that back if you don't have anything in writing.
And save those, save emails, save if you IM people like about your record deal or whatever, like save your IM transcripts, copy them into Word document.
Get something saved that says we're paying you for this and we're agreeing to it. Even the standard word processing programs generally have just form contracts that you could just plug in. Yeah, you're paying me this to produce these tracks. Sign. Here we go. The guy.
I'm so angry right now. I want to find that woman.
Let's get that woman.
Indie rock vigilantism.
That's right.
She's crawling out the bathroom window with the master.
Actually, it wouldn't be indie rock. It'd be indie inspirational vigilantism.
I also loved the message from Chris Robesy, who played the coffee shop where they said the sound system was $9,000. I think I've played that place, but that, let me tell you, is a huge warning sign. If you're playing anywhere and they talk about the sound system by the dollar amount, that means, one, they don't know anything about sound systems, and they just know that they paid a lot of money, and so they assume it's good. And you could pay a lot of money for junk, or in this case, it was obviously one of those systems that's just wired into the building, and the mixer may have been decent, but it was just something where there was wired into the building, and so the guy knows, I paid $9,000, it must sound great. And that happens a lot with little coffee shops, churches. That happens a lot because a lot of times they don't know what the sound system is. They just saw the price tag and assume it's good. So
or it's mostly there for a podium and a speaker.
Yeah, it's not meant for music. There was this coffee shop here in town I've played several times. Same kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, we've got that and this and that as far as the equipment, but they only had like one real mic stand, and they come walking out with some contraption that looks like something that the lead singer from Aerosmith would use. What's his name? With like
Tyler.
He's got it's got like 6 legs coming off the back, just like little legs, and something you would spin and point at the camera for an 80s heavy metal video. And it had like a gooseneck on it.
Oh my gosh.
That's not a mic stand. And so
my group we used to always bring mic stands because we had 3 vocalists, and it was just, especially when we played smaller places, they invariably only have 2.
Yeah.
And then they look
stands.
at you like you're an idiot or something when you say we have 3 vocals. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Or they'll have one mic, and then I've had this happen too, where they've got one Shure 58 that looks fine. The others look like they backed their car over them.
Yeah, totally.
They've been drugged several blocks and still have slobber and goo in them from the last person. So I always recommend when playing, if you haven't been to a venue like that or before and haven't seen their system, always bring some mic cables, a couple direct boxes, a few good mic stands, and some good mics that
And see if you can find out ahead of time what other bands have experienced there. That always helps,
I guess in this case they were
It was brand
first
new,
show.
and
Yeah.
not only did he have the humiliation of standing there with someone else holding the microphone.
That's awesome. It's like a performance art thing.
The guy keeps moving away, so he moves closer and then smashes his teeth.
Oh my God.
And the message by Paul about the compilation album, I mean, you got to look at those things carefully. Obviously, they were in high school and just wanted anything or excited about getting something. But I've heard that's being a scam a lot. It doesn't sound like it was a scam in this place. It's the situation. It sounded like it was a nonprofit organization that had the best of intentions, but again, they're not album record producers. They probably got in over their head as well. And didn't really know how to pull it off, and it just got shelved, and they moved on. But
Anytime you're asked to pay up front for something like that, it should be kind of a warning sign.
but yeah, you just got to be careful and really read through the contract, and like the money saying it was a donation. There's a warning sign.
Yeah.
So those were the calls for this show. We've been getting a lot of calls. We can't play them all, and if you want the phone number, you got to go to our website to get it. Robert, is it available on the website? I believe it is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
So call, leave us a message. We'd love to hear any more mistake stories. And if you have some success stories, I think we may need a cleansing now. So feel free to send some success stories. But my tip is to keep your calls brief, 2 minutes. A few calls have gone really long, and they're too long for us to play. But we love hearing from you, so feel free to call, and you can also just leave regular feedback, or if you just want to say hey or whatever, and we'll try and work some of those in as well. All right, well, let's move into just some general feedback. We got some people. Richard Hunter from the band The Movie Goers, he emailed in a tip that I thought was really good, worth sharing, and that his band had entered a local songwriter contest, and they ended up winning, and the prize was basically 2 8-hour days at this really nice studio. I think he was in San Diego, and it totally helped them make their album possible. So he thought, maybe it's because it was more a local contest, that there wasn't as many entrants into the contest, and so their music really stood out, and they won. So his tip was to maybe focus on some local contests before you send in music to those national contests, because if you send music to those national contests, there's usually an entry fee and hundreds of thousands of people probably sending in albums, and
definitely.
so the chances of standing out are slimmer. Even though the prizes are usually nice and big, but 2 days in a really nice studio for free, help you get your album done. That's seems more doable, and it paid off. So that was a good tip from Richard. So the other email I had was from Allie Burcock of Arcana Music, and I had corresponded with Allie about jazz musicians and what they can do to get their music out there, because a lot of what we talk about on the podcast really is geared towards people who produce albums and are out selling them, playing venues, and more towards the indie rock, pop stuff. So Allie had a couple good questions I thought I'd throw out there, and maybe other people can chime in with some advice or some comments if you're a fellow jazz musician out there. So one was, what kind of conferences can instrumental jazz groups attend to meet bookers? And it says, I hear of these things for folk, world music type groups, but is there anything out there for us, for jazz artists? And I need to look into it, but I think the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation down in New Orleans does a conference that's geared towards jazz artists, hooking them up with concert promoters and bookers. I know they're definitely working to do things in that area, because I was just down there in New Orleans hanging out with them. Definitely, if you're a jazz artist, no matter where you're at, I would check out their website and maybe send them a hello email asking for some advice on that. Scott Aegis over there, he's a really cool guy, runs the foundation, and they are also the ones that put on Jazz Fest down there in New Orleans, which is a huge festival every year. So they could get you hooked up with some people that might point you in the right direction.
And too, I mean, 1% of all music sold is actually jazz these days. But there's still a lot of people out there making jazz music, and there's a lot of jazz fans. And if you go online, there's lots of jazz communities and people talking about jazz and ways of getting in touch with those people.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some good jazz blogs. And some things like
magazines
that. Yeah, there's lots of magazines. So definitely be reading those materials. Kind of follow, if there's a group that you see getting written about. Because I know the difficult thing with jazz is a lot of it is just performance. And that kind of goes on to another question here was, should we just pretend there's no difference between jazz groups and indie rock when marketing ourselves? Do we do ourselves a disservice by thinking of ourselves as one of the smallest demographics? Is it optimistic or crazy to think that an instrumental jazz quartet on the experimental side of things could reach the same numbers as, some big name artists, And
I don't think it's crazy at all. I mean, in Portland, there's a band called Blue Cranes, which is primarily a jazz or a fusion group, but instrumental, and they're kind of out there, and they appeal to tons of, indie rock, little hipsters all over they're great. They deserve it, but they market themselves to pretty much everyone.
And like I mentioned, I was just down at Jazz Fest, and there was thousands and thousands of people there. And, jazz artists that aren't household names outside of the jazz community. Inside the jazz community, they'd be household names, playing on these gigantic stages to just enormous crowds. And so it's just a matter of tapping into that niche of people. The thing I'd like to hear from some jazz artists out there, and feel free to email us or call and leave a message, is how you go about marketing yourself when you don't really make and produce CDs, because a lot of jazz is based on traditional music, songs that aren't necessarily in the public domain, but are traditional jazz standards. So a lot of times they don't record their version, or the live experience is really the thing. It's just about the soloing and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see if someone's found a creative way to market their shows as a jazz artist, because I know there's jazz clubs and
also don't be afraid. I think that we've talked about this, and I think it came up a little bit in the David Harrington interview from the Kronos Quartet. Is that don't necessarily box yourself into one category. Think that you have, just because you're a jazz musician, you have to market yourself like a jazz musician, or if you're a rock musician, you have to market yourself as a rock musician. The best way to stand out is to creatively market yourself in maybe ways that other people aren't marketing themselves.
Yeah, and the other quick question he had here one in the email was, I hear of jazz clubs closing all the time. This has certainly been true in Toronto. The obvious solutions for jazz groups is to seek out alternative, non-traditional venues to play. And I think that's true with any venues. It's not just jazz. I mean, clubs are closing all the time. There's a couple clubs here in Portland. I've only lived here for about 8 years, and I think they've been a different venue every 2 years, you know?
Right.
And so that's just kind of the downside of the club industry. I mean, there's constant turnover there. There's generally one or two good jazz clubs in a good city, and you know, some other places that might be interesting to consider that you may not have thought of. Like right by my house, there's this pretty fancy movie theater that went in that also has a restaurant, and they're trying to, you know, redo the movie theater experience. They have very talented musicians playing in the restaurant every weekend, and you know, these aren't slouches that are just trying to scrape by to, you know, get some lame gig. I mean, they're really talented, and I've seen them have like 3 pieces playing and things like that. So I know like fancy restaurants are trying things out like that. So you might, you know, think outside the box what's going on, and
yeah, even a movie theater, a mall. I mean, I feel like jazz is very malleable as far as where it can be performed, just because it has this air of sophistication. People are willing to kind of tolerate it in any setting almost. So
yeah, so I think you know, and it's also much easier. Generally, jazz doesn't require a sound system or anything like that, so you definitely have the advantage there. So I don't know. It is frustrating when, you know, a good club closes. There's a couple here in Portland that if they closed, it'd be really damaging to the pop rock scene. But so it is frustrating when that happens. But I'm sure in Toronto, some others will pop up.
We're open for a pop band.
Yeah.
Or play with a pop band.
Right.
You know, I mean, that sort of cross-pollination, it's not really, you know, you may think you're compromising your style by playing with rock musicians or something like that, but you also might be bringing jazz to some people who haven't heard it.
Yeah. If you go to a jazz festival, I'm sure there's probably one up in Toronto, or there may be, you know, there's some here in town in Portland. I'm sure Seattle has a big one. I know, like I mentioned, the New Orleans Jazz Festival. If you go to those, you see a lot of stuff like that where there's some different combinations. It was especially at the one in New Orleans because, like, you know, they had the Roots playing, they had Stevie Wonder, Diana Krall, they had, you know, the Raconteurs. Obviously, they weren't all playing together, but while I was down there were some people doing some interesting combo type sets where it was like more of this rock band, but they had like a trumpet player sitting in for their set. So things like that, you know, if you kind of think outside of the box and maybe can team up with some people that are, you know, where it works, you're not putting a metal band with, you know, a jazz cello player.
Hey, you
never know.
Sure,
Hey, I'm going to start my metal band with jazz. So anyway, but thanks for the email. We hope that helps. And if you have any comments or suggestions from the world of jazz, definitely send us an email, info@cdbabypodcast.com, or go to our website to get the phone number and give us a call. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.